In the hidden veins of the fight game, where echoes of old battles haunt empty gyms and blood still stains forgotten mats, there emerged a phantom so precise, so terrifyingly graceful, it felt like watching a ghost swing a sword made of wind. Zabit Magomedsharipov wasn't just a fighter. He was a storm disguised as a man, a creature born not from the earth, but from the silence between lightning strikes. He didn't walk into cages, he materialized, weightless, otherworldly, like a rumor made flesh. In Dagestan, where boys are molded by winters harsher than steel and traditions older than war, he forged a different weapon, one of air, timing, and elegance. He bent space. He danced where others fought. His movement wasn't footwork, it was poetry dressed in combat boots, and his strikes came from places opponents hadn't even learned to defend. Men trained their whole lives to punch and wrestle, but Zabit trained to erase time, to turn a second into a century for those trapped inside his web. His presence broke the rules of the sport. Not louder, not harder, cleaner, colder, sharper. It wasn't just talent, it was obsession, a madness hidden behind dark, unreadable eyes. Coaches spoke of him in half whispers like a myth that might vanish if said too loud. Fighters watched him not with rivalry, but fear dressed as curiosity. Fans sensed it too, that terrible, beautiful tension that something unreal was happening before them. Something too pure to last. He wasn't chasing belts, he was chasing mastery, chasing a moment so perfect it would outlive him. Every time he stepped through the cage door, gravity shifted, and every man across from him knew they weren't facing a fighter. They were facing inevitability. Before the lights, before the cameras, before the crowd even knew his name, there was a boy stalking frostbitten streets in Dagestan, his breath misting in the cold, his bones aching with hunger, not for food, but for greatness. In a town where strength wasn't an option, but a requirement for survival, Zabit wasn't built. He was forged, shaped by snow, silence, and sweat. He wasn't born to brawl, he was born to defy, to split the very rules of combat apart and stitch them back together with threads of impossibility. Where others ran from pain, he chased it, miles on foot, hours in freezing gyms, training until his lungs burned and his legs betrayed him, then training more. His eyes, sharp and ancient for a child, spoke of storms not yet named, battles not yet fought. Every kick, every spin, every impossible strike was born there in obscurity, long before crowds screamed his name. Coaches knew early, but this was no ordinary boy. There was something in his pulse, a rhythm unfamiliar to men, like a drumbeat from a war that hadn't begun. They saw obsession in his hunger, a devotion that drowned out fear, sleep, and failure. His first fights weren't in cages, but against doubt, distance, and fate itself. Even then, the legends were whispered, about a kid who moved like shadow and hit like stone, a storm gathering in silence. He didn't just learn martial arts, he devoured them, merging traditions like a blacksmith forging a new, unnamed weapon. And in that cold, forgotten place, a phantom was born. The school that shaped him was no ordinary place. It was a crucible of sweat and discipline called the 5 Directions of the World, where children didn't just train, they bled, broke, and rebuilt themselves into weapons. Zabit wasn't the strongest, not the biggest, but he was the most relentless, a force that refused to yield, obsessed with the perfection of motion, the annihilation of hesitation. Every morning began with pain, every evening ended with exhaustion, and in between, Zabit sculpted himself into something alien, something elegant and savage in equal measure. He fought older boys, tougher boys, beat them not with brute strength, but with angles, speed, deception. He made them miss, made them doubt, made them crumble. His coaches saw it early, that unnatural calm under pressure, a predator's patience mixed with an artist's precision. The other students called his dorm the Cave, a dark, cramped space where Zabit honed his chaos, but he didn't complain. It was his sanctuary, a temple where pain was a promise, and improvement the only reward. He devoured Wushu Sanda, the martial art of kings, and turned its complex fusion of throws, kicks, and strikes into something unrecognizable, personal, deadly. Trophies came, victories piled up, but the boy remained distant, untouched by praise, uninterested in applause. His fight was not with others, but with himself, an endless pursuit of mastery, of flawless execution. In every movement there was intent, a razor-sharp clarity that separated him from the noise of ambition. Zabit wasn't made for fame, he was made for legacy. Day after day, Zabit walked miles on frozen roads just to reach the gym. His breath sharp, his legs numb, chasing a dream stitched so deep into his bones it ached louder than the cold. His parents, weary and afraid, begged him to stop, fearing for his safety, for his future, but he was deaf to anything except the rhythm of destiny pounding in his chest. When his father hesitated, it was his uncle who intervened, recognizing the storm that lived in the boy's eyes, securing him a place in Russia's elite martial arts boarding school, a place where weakness was suffocated and only the ruthless survived. Zabit passed the entrance exams not with ease, but with ferocity, a fire so undeniable even the judges felt it burn. His world became a cycle of training and study, his life reduced to combat, discipline, sacrifice. He wasn't living for moments of glory or light, he was building an empire inside himself. Every opponent was a test, every setback a lesson, and every bruise a reminder that greatness was not given. It was taken by those savage enough to suffer for it. In the cramped dormitory where others cracked under pressure, Zabit thrived. His nights filled with endless drills, silent meditations, and the steady pulse of his own heartbeat reminding him there was no escape, no other path. While others sought fame, he sought perfection. He wasn't chasing victories, he was chasing invincibility, a weapon sharpened in solitude, waiting for a world that wouldn't see him coming. Under the brutal eye of Zabit Magomedsharipov, a coach who forged champions with fire and indifference, Zabit transformed from a gifted boy into a relentless predator. The others feared the man, but Zabit revered him, not for kindness, but for the unforgiving standard he demanded: perfection or exile. The cave-like dormitory wasn't a home, it was a forge, its walls stained with sweat and silent war cries, echoing with the relentless thud of fists meeting pads long after dark. Here boys broke. Here futures were decided in blood. Zabit thrived in this pit, fighting older, heavier, hungrier opponents, and making them look slow, predictable, mortal. There was no retreat in him, only forward motion, only rhythm sharpened by violence. Wushu Sanda wasn't a style to him, it was language, and Zabit spoke it like a poet in battle. Every throw, every high kick, every whip-like strike was art fused with war, movement sculpted by necessity and perfected by obsession. He wasn't fighting for applause, for records, or recognition. He fought to erase flaws, to inch closer to the impossible, to touch that moment where every movement is undeniable, unquestionable, lethal. In this crucible, while others cracked under pressure, Zabit adapted, becoming something colder, calmer, far more dangerous than anyone realized. He wasn't just learning to fight, he was building a language of combat no one else could read. Wushu wasn't just an art in Zabit's hands. It was a weapon he bent, reshaped, and sharpened into something unrecognizable. A fusion of elegance and destruction that made opponents question the very ground they stood on. He wasn't interested in being the best within a system. He was intent on breaking the system itself, moving like water, striking like lightning, chaining together throws, kicks, and fists into a storm. No one could predict. Coaches spoke in hushed tones about how he blended. Disciplines meant to stay separate. How his footwork made seasoned veterans stumble. How his strikes came from places no guard could cover. In every tournament, whether in Russia, Europe, or on the world stage, his victories felt inevitable, like watching a tide swallow fire. The trophies meant nothing to him, just symbols of incomplete battles, markers on a map leading deeper into unknown territory. His presence was quiet, his gaze detached, but when he moved, crowds leaned forward, knowing they were witnessing something the sport wasn't ready for. What set Zabit apart wasn't size, power, or brute force. It was the way he erased hesitation, the way he made danger beautiful, how he bent time between strikes. Even those who beat him in points left shaken, aware they'd faced something bigger than the fight itself. Zabit wasn't chasing medals, he was chasing a myth and becoming one. Despite victories stacking like bricks in a fortress, Zabit remained untouched by fame's seduction, a phantom uninterested in bright lights or hollow interviews. While others craved attention, he retreated deeper into the shadows, his silence heavier than any headline. His friends called it a shame, said he could have been the face of federations, a national hero, a brand. But Zabit didn't care for trophies shaped like cameras. He was chasing a different opponent, one the public couldn't see. An invisible war between mastery and mediocrity waged within his own bones. He could have worn medals like armor, walked red carpets, smiled for shallow applause. But he left that for lesser men. Every spotlight aimed his way flickered and died because this wasn't a man built for celebrity. He wasn't allergic to fame, he was immune to it. While fighters sold themselves with words, he spoke only through the whip of a spinning kick, the crack of a fist splitting air, the suffocating silence of a perfect transition. People tried to define him, place him in categories, but Zabit slipped through them like smoke, too sharp for simple labels. Even his friends admitted it. This wasn't about opponents anymore. Zabit was fighting expectation itself, and every time he entered the cage, he was dragging the myth of what a fighter could be one step closer to legend. When he finally stepped into the professional arena, the world had no clue what was coming. No hype, no headlines, just a name buried in obscurity and a storm gathering in silence. May 9th, 2012, Odessa, Ukraine. His debut against Zelya Pabayev, a name no one would remember after that night. They expected a brawl, a scrap between two unknowns, but what they witnessed was the arrival of something alien. Zabit didn't just win. He dismantled reality inside that cage, striking with precision so clean it felt rehearsed. Yet it was pure instinct, sharpened by years of isolation and obsession. His movements made Pabayev look like a man caught in the wrong sport, unable to decipher the blurring angles, the impossible timing, the predator's calm. A spinning back fist cracked the air like a thunderclap, and when Pabayev hit the canvas, it wasn't defeat. It was prophecy. That wasn't a fight, it was a message, a warning shot across a world that wasn't ready for a warrior born from frost and fury. There were no viral clips, no pay-per-view bonuses, just a phantom walking back to the shadows, leaving behind a broken opponent and a silent room filled with something no one could name: fear. And the storm had just begun. That first victory wasn't a spark. It was ignition, the start of a silent empire built on domination without a microphone, a legend that would travel faster than his name. Zabit didn't pause to admire his work, didn't bask in applause. He vanished, already hunting the next fight, the next lesson, the next piece of himself he needed to sharpen. 2 months later, another name, another opponent, another dismantling. No cameras captured it, no crowd screamed for it. The footage was lost, swallowed by the void that devours the early days of the greats. It didn't matter. Zabit didn't need witnesses. Each round was a personal war, a sacred ritual, and he treated every nameless opponent as if they stood between him and eternity. Every strike, every step, every submission attempt was a workshop, a test of whether the monster he was building was real or illusion. While others fought for record padding and paychecks, Zabit fought for evolution, for edges so sharp they could split seconds. Each bout added weight to the myth, not because the world was watching, but because those who faced him left changed, their confidence punctured, their futures clouded. Zabit wasn't interested in crushing bodies. He was breaking patterns, making men doubt the shape of the fight itself. And the storm gathered strength. By the time he stepped into Pro FC 42 for his third fight, Zabit had already outgrown the cage most prospects never escape, carrying a predator's calm that made even seasoned fighters uneasy. Across from him stood Abubakar Yusupov, a solid name, a grinder built to drown young talent in pressure and grit. But when the bell rang, Zabit didn't fight like a man surviving. He fought like one orchestrating. His kicks sliced through the air with sniper precision, his punches landing with the certainty of a veteran who'd already seen the outcome. Yusupov lunged for takedowns, desperate to smother the storm, but Zabit wasn't drowning. He was breathing underwater. Every defense, every counter was too clean, too smooth, like water folding around a stone. It wasn't chaos, it was a man writing his own ending while the other tried to guess the plot. When the choke came, it wasn't brutal. It was surgical, a quiet, inescapable inevitability that left Yusupov tapping not from pain, but from being completely, hopelessly outmatched. There was no celebration, no roar, just the eerie calm of a fighter who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Zabit had known the ending before the first strike, and the storm rolled on, heavier, faster, colder. The roar of the crowd faded into a pulse, a steady thrum beneath Zabit's feet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath for him. Across from him stood Jeremy Stevens, a walking wrecking ball, known for folding men with a single shot. But Zabit wasn't made of the same brittle material. He was crafted from storms and shadows, sharpened by years of solitude and scars unseen. Every glance, every faint twitch of his hand bent reality around him like a gravitational pull. Stevens swung with bad intentions, yet hit only smoke. Zabit's jabs sliced through the air like a scalpel, and his kicks cracked like rifle shots. The cage shrank, not for Stevens, but for inevitability. Even the commentators sensed it. This wasn't a contest. It was a lesson written in bruises and sweat. Each slip, each pivot was a message. You cannot catch a ghost. Zabit turned violence into ballet and pain into punctuation marks. The clock ticked, but time belonged to him now. Stevens charged again and again, missing the present while chasing a phantom future. By the final bell, the crowd wasn't cheering, they were witnessing. A man who walked through fire without ash clinging to his skin. Zabit had entered the top ranks not as a brawler, but as an oracle with bloodied hands. The cage door opened, but it felt like something ancient and unexplainable had just stepped out, leaving behind a trembling world that would never quite be the same. The whispers had started long before the fight. Does he fade? They asked. Can he go deep? Zabit heard it all, the doubts stitched into every question, but his silence was never surrender. It was calculation. When the moment came against Calvin Kattar in Moscow, it was supposed to be 5 rounds, a true proving ground. Fate trimmed it to 3. The bell rang and Zabit painted the canvas with movement, a storm of spinning kicks and laser-precise jabs, making Kattar chase shadows. But time, that merciless spectator, tugged at his breath. By the third, the perfect storm showed cracks, the flawless rhythm staggered. Kattar marched forward, fists loaded with retribution, hoping to snatch the ghost from the air. The crowd leaned in, hearts pounding, not out of fear, but hunger. Would this be the moment the storm broke? Zabit, chest heaving, eyes sharpened by necessity, bit down on the fatigue and fired back, every strike fueled by defiance, not ease. He didn't vanish. He endured. And though the victory was his, the unease lingered. For the first time, the myth bled, and in that blood, the doubters found courage. But what they missed was the truth. Even gods stumble, and when they do, it only makes their rise more terrifying. In the dark halls of the UFC machine, his name still sparked like static. The Yair fight teased again, and Zabit, true to form, accepted without hesitation. But fate, that cruel architect, pulled the string once more. An injury, another withdrawal, another silence. No plan B, no substitute war. Just an empty card and a vanishing headline. The machine rolled on, indifferent, but the storm had already begun to darken. Zabit returned home, his legacy hanging in limbo. And though his face wore serenity, inside, a storm clashed against the bones of wasted time. Every missed fight wasn't just a lost paycheck. It was a theft of destiny. He watched lesser men get opportunities, belts, headlines, while he trained in obscurity, a blade growing sharper in a locked room. The division moved on like a river, and yet no one filled the space he left behind. A gap shaped like a phantom, an absence that screamed. The cage missed him. The fans felt the chill. And as the months turned into years, Zabit transformed from contender to myth, from myth to legend, not by presence, but by haunting everything the sport failed to give him. By the time the rumors thickened, it wasn't just fans guessing. Insiders whispered, coaches hinted, managers sighed. Retirement, illness, hidden injuries that gnawed at his frame. Not the kind that make headlines, but the kind that steal futures. a diaphragm spasm, shoulder blades that wouldn't obey, nights where breath came sharp and the body betrayed the will. Yet not once did he posture, complain, or sell his suffering for sympathy. In silence, he let the fight pass him by, knowing that even storms must rest. The UFC erased him from the rankings without a word. No video, no farewell montage. Just a missing name where Thunder once lived. But in every gym, every tape room, his name still surfaced like a ghost's breath. Fighters studying footage, coaches dissecting his movements, analysts mourning lost potential. The fight world had moved on, but it moved with a limp, because some absences are louder than presence. Zabit's quiet disappearance wasn't defeat. It was the rarest thing in combat sports. A man choosing to leave before the game could bleed him dry. When the final word came, it wasn't a roar but a sigh. A post, clean and honest. Zabit Magomedsharipov was done. Not because his heart had grown cold, but because his body was no longer an ally. 30 years old, 6 UFC wins, no damage taken, no collapse. Only a trail of bewildered opponents and an archive of moments that defied gravity. He wrote his truth in combat, spoke through motion, and when words finally came, they carried weight. They promised me title fights. They gave me nothing. It wasn't rage, it was fact. The machine had no room for monks, for quiet killers. It wanted megaphones, masks, and blood feuds. Zabit was none of those. He was the cold wind off a mountain, the pause before lightning. He left untouched, unbroken, untarnished. And in leaving, he left behind not emptiness, but a legend suspended in midair. Not a fall, not a decline. Just a figure frozen, perfect, in the moment before the storm. The MMA world mourned in its own chaotic way. Fighters who once envied him paid quiet respects. Coaches referenced him in hushed tones, as if speaking his name too loud would summon the ghost back into the cage. Fans rewatched old fights, not for the outcome, but to study the things they'd missed the first time. The subtle shifts, the impossible balance, the serenity in violence. What lingered wasn't regret, but reverence. They knew what they'd lost, though they couldn't name it. Not just a fighter, but a proof of concept. That technique could command attention in a world obsessed with brute force. That elegance could be as lethal as aggression. In those moments, when his clips replayed in slow motion, you could feel the ache. The sense that something ancient, something bigger than titles and rankings, had quietly stepped out of the frame. Zabit wasn't gone because he was beaten. He was gone because the world wasn't built to hold men like him. And far from the cameras, in the quiet of Dagestan's mountains, Zabit rebuilt a different kind of empire. No posters, no sold-out arenas, just sweat, repetition, and the next generation of killers forming beneath his gaze. He didn't teach them to be him. No one could. He taught them to understand the fight, to breathe inside chaos, to let movement become instinct. His students watched him with a reverence few living men receive, not because of his record, but because of what he represented. The rare warrior who fought for mastery, not applause. In those training halls, his name meant something different. It wasn't a celebrity, it was a standard. A proof that you didn't need to chase cameras to be remembered. The old legends used to say you could tell a master by the silence he left behind. And in those rooms, when the gloves hung quiet and the air stilled, it wasn't just Zabit's presence that lingered. It was his philosophy. Whispers carried his influence farther than he ever intended. In gyms across Brazil, the US, Indonesia, his style was mimicked, his techniques dissected like scripture. Fighters began training spinning kicks where they once drilled takedowns. Coaches told their students, learn patience, learn to disappear. And though his face faded from posters, his ghost walked in every cage where a man dared to fight like water. His name, a quiet test. The daring few tried to follow his rhythm, most failed. Because what Zabit carried couldn't be taught in drills. It was born in cold winters and long silences. It was carried in restraint, not rage. In movement that felt inevitable. His victories weren't moments. They were messages. And though the UFC machine tried to erase him from the now, they accidentally made him eternal. A watermark of purity, stamped into a blood sport that craves noise but secretly bows to elegance. And yet, perhaps the most haunting truth was this. Zabit didn't need the belt. Never did. He had already become what others spend careers chasing. While champions scrambled for pay-per-views and headliners, he carved his name into something older. Not the champion of a division, the champion of an idea. Proof that violence could be beautiful, that timing could conquer muscle, that a storm could pass through a cage without breaking its own heart. He would have beaten legends, that much everyone knew. Holloway, Volkanovski, Ortega, it didn't matter. The outcome was written in the movements he'd already made. But destiny isn't always about conquests. Sometimes it's about restraint, about walking away untouched. Zabit did what most men fear: he'd left while he was still a weapon, and in doing so, his absence became more powerful than any reign he could have claimed. Now, the sport stands like a soldier missing its ghost. New contenders rise, old names fade, belts change hands, but the gap he left remains unfillable. In every spinning back kick, in every perfect feint, you can feel it. The echo, the standard, that stillness before chaos that belonged only to him. His students call him Ustaz, the master, and they carry his fingerprint in every calculated risk they take. The world won't hear them coming, just like they never heard him. And years from now, when a young warrior moves like wind and carves beauty into violence, a voice in the crowd will whisper, "That was Zabit's touch." Not because he returned, but because he never left.